So let's say I've never lost a grandmother, but I have experienced loss. So empathy is when I actually tap into my experience of loss and extend that level of sensitivity to you.
So welcome to In the Company of Charity, the podcast of the Daughters of Charity. And I am here after a nice Thanksgiving holiday with my friend and wonderful co-host, Sister Liz Sjoberg. How are you, sister?
I am full, but full of food and full of life and love.
Hey. Oh, that's so sweet. So you had a nice holiday?
It was
Thanksgiving,
wonderful.
feast days.
We had our Triduum of feast days.
Yeah.
The Miraculous Medal, St. Catherine Labouré, the foundation of the company. And so it was nice because, you get to celebrate the sort of secular holiday where you come together, although it was just us four in the house. But, and then you also, for us as daughters, get to say thank you to God for these wonderful gifts and these feasts that we have. So
yeah, we had a really nice time. There were 5 of us, and we did kind of the traditional daughter charity, put the menu on the refrigerator, and everybody signs up for something, and I usually get prayer, biscuits, and the green vegetable. So
green bean casserole, is that you?
No, I don't even go that far. No, not everybody likes that here. In the Northeast, it's a little different. We don't quite see a lot of that. There's a lot of cranberry sauce, of course.
Yes.
A lot of stuffing, dressing, gravy. It's kind of heavy, heavy stuff. But I kind of missed some of the southern foods that, like fried turkey. Like there aren't many fried turkeys up here.
People were smoking turkeys around here.
Yeah, we just think you just put it in the oven, wait for it to pop. You know what I'm saying? That's like, that's it, so there's not as much variety, mashed potatoes, of course, but no cornbread dressing. It's always just bread dressing, so that was a little different too. So I'm still getting used to being back up north,
Yes.
where the tradition
I was in charge of
a little different.
I was in charge of the turkey this year.
Wow. Yeah, I've never signed up, nor was I invited to. I probably could do it. I mean, I'm a pretty capable person. I just have zero desire to get that engaged with.
Well, the pro tip I learned
Yeah.
over the last couple of years of doing turkey, for whatever reason, I end up doing the turkey in this particular local community. But the top of the turkey was fine and done. The bottom, not so much. So we had to turn the bird upside down so that these bottom parts were able to kind of come up to temperature.
That might be an oven issue, sister. I don't think that was necessarily. Yeah, but I love telling stories. Yeah, I always tell stories about my grandmother, when I stayed with her when I was a little girl, and she would cook this turkey. She was very, very Italian, so she just cooked it because it was expected, but we also had raviolis and meatballs and bagiol and all these other Italian things. But she would put the turkey in the oven, and she would call to me and she'd say, Elizabeth, come quick. And I'd go, and she'd have it like hanging out of the pan, like he was trying to run away. So like these vivid Thanksgiving memories of my grandmother, who I just worship, I just try to imagine her like yanking, pulling this big old turkey just to get me to run in and help her put the turkey back in the pan. It's great. It's just a great memory. It's just a great memory.
Adorable.
Yeah, it was adorable. She was amazing. She used to do it with gingerbread men too. She would like bend one of its legs, pretend it was running away, It's crazy lady.
Grandma.
Yeah, all grandma. Yeah. Well, my Nana.
Well, just like we had the treat of pumpkin pie and pecan pie and all that, we have a treat for everyone today in this
yes.
that's coming.
Yeah, it is deep and it's good. I mean, it's really good, but give yourself a little time. Sister Liz spent some time with Widian Nicola, good friend of hers, and they've known each other a long time. And Widian is a very, very deep thinker. There's no doubt. But the way she is able to bring concepts of theology or spirituality and psychology together, you know, is really amazing. I mean, we just, to be serious, she really is a very deep, very intellectual thinker. Like you have to really listen. And when you're listening, you feel like, wow, this is pretty amazing. But, I was joking, saying if your head doesn't explode by the time you're done, you haven't listened well enough. You weren't really listening. And so that's not a threat. That's just, to be prepared for a really blockbuster kind of episode. I enjoyed, I enjoyed it. And, I knew Widian before, but I've not talked with her for a long time. So there was a part of me that was saying, oh, yes, I remember this side of her, So it's fabulous, though. I think she was great.
Great concepts in there. I really like the idea of talking about living out of our best selves and our highest selves, if you will, and how do we bring that to when we talk to other people, because we want to be whole ourselves, but then also find the way to serve others out of that fullness, you know? And so obviously as a social worker, she deals with a lot of people who are struggling in many ways and maybe have had traumatic experiences. And so you get kind of into some of that, the intersection of psychology, social work, and spirituality. And I think how the things of faith can help us to become whole, but it's not without that human piece of knowing how our minds work, how our emotions work, and so on, so that we can, bring those things together.
Yeah, and I appreciated, the areas when she spoke about the ability to be empathetic, to empathize with someone else's suffering is deeper within yourself, and it can be more powerful in your interaction when you're able to touch within your own suffering. Can you really empathize with the suffering of another? Of course, knowing our sufferings are not the same, but it brings us to that place of humanity, saying, no one's beneath me, I'm not above anyone. This experience I'm having with another person is one in which we're both interacting in our spiritual selves, our psychology, our who we are, where we come from. All of those things impact the way we interact. And so when I'm in touch with myself, as you're saying, when I'm working out of my best self, then I can call the best self of the other, who may be just lost in the pain that they're in, and they need someone to help lift them out of that. So that to me was really powerful, so yeah, it was a great interview. And I think everyone will enjoy it.
Episode.
Absolutely.
And please send us your feedback, your comments, questions to companyofcharity@gmail.com, and in the Company of Charity podcast on Instagram, y'all. Follow us and send any private messages with questions, suggestions. This is a very thought-provoking episode, and so feel free to send us your thoughts. We'd love to hear them.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone. Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. And I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Widian Nicola. Great to have you, Wid. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
True confessions, Widian and I have known each other for many, many years.
Many.
He is a good friend. So say a little bit about where you came up with the idea of what you're working on right now, and how it's whether it's sort of the culmination of where you've come from and what you've studied, and the integration of faith and spirituality and mental health. It's all good stuff.
It's such good stuff. And I have to be completely honest, I'm still figuring it out. And I have the basics down. But I think that that's sort of the point of understanding scripture, is that you see a particular passage or like an idea that's presented in scripture through a different lens at every juncture of life, right? So like the way I read, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength at 18 is going to sound and feel different than the way in which I heard it at 28, or the way I hear it now at 38. It's so there's many facets, kind of like a diamond, you know. And so of course, any concept that I'm ruminating in right now is going to have a different definition or understanding, at least personally for me, as it continues to develop through the course of my life. And that's actually the foundational idea here, is that that the way in which we evolve, the way in which we grow, the way in which we heal is fundamentally process and relationally oriented. So the way in which I sort of understand the life of Jesus and the life that he encourages us to live is not A, temporary, and B, it's not instantaneous. And on that note, so in terms of that time, there's process, but it's also not individual and isolated. So it's both process oriented, meaning that it takes time to develop change, to experience healing, to awaken, to grow in our sense of consciousness. It takes time. God is process, and I'm going to explain what that means specifically. But also God is, and our experience is fundamentally, and I would even say essentially, relational. So that we cannot grow, again, instantaneously or heal within a moment's time, that it takes a while. And it's also contingent and dependent on other people. Of course, you know, when Jesus was doing all his healings, he would go up and he would heal people through his spirit and through his powers. But he never healed anybody who didn't want to be healed, which says to me that there is a choosing, there is a knowingness, there is a movement of spirit and will and desire for healing. But it was also in collaborative process with Jesus, right? So it wasn't individual. It wasn't, again, like, oh, I'm just gonna sort of hang out with myself and heal my trauma and like just read or just pray and that's it. That crap does not happen. It doesn't happen that way. It's impossible. And so part of my work has been to understand, or to look through and therefore translate Jesus is saying, or what scripture is teaching us about how to live a life of love, into modern psychological concepts. So what the heck did Jesus actually mean when he said to the young lawyer who questioned him about who his neighbor is, for example? What did he really mean in terms of the way in which we can understand it in modern language? Yeah, so that's what I'm sitting with. I'm thinking about how to translate healing, the idea of healing and sin and grace through language that's more prevalent today, like in psychology, for example, like words, concepts or theories of attachment and bonding. And neuroplasticity, for example, which is an individual or the human capacity, the human brain's capacity to change and shift over time. That essentially what science is telling us, and you might already know a lot of this yourself, but what science is showing us, that the way in which we formulate our what we call internal schemas, these maps, these relational maps in our head, it becomes imprinted in our psyche and literally in our brain through our first interactions in childhood, our early interactions in childhood. So we don't just come out and like, boom, we can't change. That's just, yeah, we're born out, it's genetic, move on. There is a lot of genetic basis for mental health, for sure, and other ailments, absolutely. But it's also very much influenced and impacted by environment. And when I say environment, I mean social environment, physical environment as well, right? If you grew up in poverty, don't have access to clean water, you live in a place that's phenomenally stressful, that takes a toll on the human body. I'm talking about relational interaction. So there's a lot there that we could think about in terms of how to understand the message of Jesus's message about how we do love and how we become love, incarnate love, which is what Jesus was, through a process of being fully human, which again is what Jesus did, right? That's the significance of Jesus's life, is that he became fully human so that he might understand that it is through our full human experience that we become more divine or more like him. That's what I'm saying.
Are there certain biblical stories that you're focusing on in the book? Like, for example, I think classic Woman at the Well, I think is a huge one as far as conversion and healing. What are there certain stories that you were sort of drawn to when you're thinking about it?
Yeah, that's so I'm writing a paper now that, again, as Sister Liz is alluding to, that hopefully will translate into something bigger for the masses. But so part of what I'm doing, and this is sort of the significance, is I'm weaving my clinical vignettes. I'm taking real life stories, clients, composite stories of clients I've had who've experienced some form of trauma, and finding parallels, not to just lived experiences and stories of individuals within scriptures, but seeing their process in a way that captures a message in scripture. So I'm thinking about, again, the first thing that comes for me, the biggest story that I'm using somewhat as like a fundamental roadmap, is the story of the young lawyer who says to Jesus, like, what am I supposed to do to inherit to inherit the kingdom? Mm-hmm. Right? Is that what he says? Exactly. It's not exactly those words, but Jesus turns around and uses the story of the Good Samaritan. And on a very, I don't want to use the word superficial, but on the surface, the story is do good for people who struggle. But that's not really inherently what the story is about. In terms of the way I'm thinking about it psychologically, for me, the story has a lot to do with the way in which we make decisions about how we do love in the world, based on our cognitive processes, based on the evolution of our brains functioning. So, for example, I feel like I'm giving a lecture right now, but
you're doing great. Keep going.
Feel free to cut me off. Oh, I get so excited. Oh, Jesus.
We're totally not cutting that out, by the way. We're not cutting that out.
So if we think about the brain and the way in which it's evolved in at three different times evolutionarily. And so the reference to that is what we call the triune brain. So we often make decision based on different parts of the way in which our brain has evolved over time. So the more primitive the more primitive part of our brain is the brain that essentially just helps us to breathe. It just happens automatically. There's no conscious thought to it. It's make sure that our body is functioning properly. I'm blinking. I'm not thinking about blinking. Now I am, but before I wasn't. So
Right.
there is that part of the brain that's quite primitive that just helps us to function. The second part of our brain is what we call the limbic part, and that limbic part got evolved in an effort to help us really stay safe and alive. And this is the seat of fight, flight, freeze, which is a very common term, as you know, Sister Liz, being an LCSW yourself, social work power. But even just like non-clinicians know that language, right? The fight, flight, freeze. And this is the center that, for the majority of human existence, has played a role in helping us stay alive, right? So if there is a confrontation of some potential threat of some sort of saber-toothed tiger that's going to come and eat you alive, well, there's Adam and Eve trying to stay away from that saber-toothed tiger, if you want to think of that story as literal. But so that part would get activated in an effort to say, oh, in order to survive, you need to freeze, because this is the type of threat that requires a freeze response, or flight or flee, or whatever it is you need to do in that. However, over time, the brain has developed and created on sort of a shell to it's right behind our forehead here, right at the I'm seeing Liz in the video, and I'm like pointing to my forehead, but right behind our forehead is the part of our brain that's the most evolved. It's called the prefrontal cortex. Okay. And so this is the seat of reflection, of pause, of mindfulness, of creativity. This is also the place which is, one might argue, the higher self. And what happens is that when we have a perception of threat, we don't often, because we cannot necessarily at that time, particularly if we're not trained to tap into the higher order thinking, if we have a perception of threat, we don't necessarily act from that place initially. We act from the fight, flight, freeze space. And so when we talk about the story of the Good Samaritan, one might say that the first two men who did not attend to the man who had been beaten and left for dead on the side of the road, they did not respond from the more evolved part of their brain. Why? Because they may have seen that man as a perceived threat, and therefore have acted out of their lower ordered parts of their brain. And so the man who ends up attending to him, the Samaritan, who obviously there's a history there between the Jews and the Samaritans, he responded from a place of consciousness, a place of reflection, and therefore a place of love. And so my argument then is that Jesus's message really is much higher ordered thinking, which is that the way in which we ought to relate to people, and particularly people who need us the most, is through a process that's way more evolved than our primitive selves. And he's basically saying, A, step up your game, but B, there is a process that moves us from one part of our brain that's less evolved and more primitive to another part, a higher ordered part of our brain that's more reflective, that's more prayerful, that's more present, that's more engaged and connected and attuned and bonded than the other parts. Does that make sense?
Snaps for that.
Is that too much? Is that too much? What just happened?
I love it. I love it because I think so many of us number one, trauma is very prevalent, but then just the idea of competition and comparison that we get into that world where it's a spiral of who am I? Who is this person? Am I better or worse than them? And then you don't have the opportunity to get to a space where here's somebody who I can be in relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be in relationship with somebody who you're constantly comparing yourself to, or you're constantly to one up them, whether that's in friendships or coworkers or family members. I mean, it's tough to catch yourself in those moments. And if you already have some healing that needs to happen because of things that are from the past, then that's even more difficult. It's like you're starting not from zero, but from a negative.
Yeah, that's actually a really profound point to make, because trauma interferes with the way in which we relate to people fundamentally. And it's quite painful. And individuals who've gone through trauma, particularly relational trauma, neglect, abuse, where there's a real, and I don't want to get too like psychologically deep into it because I want it to make sense, especially with the psychological babble that we use. But if there is what we call a relational rupture at the beginning of life, particularly at the beginning, right? This is what attachment theory tells us. It affects the way in which we relate to people, to other people through the lifespan. And yet, this is another point I want to make. And yet, even and especially in the midst of or after trauma, grace, this is my definition of grace, is the mechanisms that God has instilled in our bodies and in our brains, literal mechanisms in our brains, to be able to repair the trauma. Again, through process and through the help of other people. So if you've experienced trauma on the one hand, through neglect, for example, or through rejection, the way in which we experience healing is through is through a new relationship that contradicts the old, which is what psychotherapy really is, I mean, quite frankly. But we don't just do that in psychotherapy. We do that in love, in friendships. We do that in other romantic relationships. So there's been I'm not sure if it was, anyway, the basis is this, that if you are in a loving, if you have one particular attachment style, right? Like you have anxiety about your partner, for example, and you worry because that's the experience you had in childhood, or you're a bit aloof and apathetic because you had to survive on your own and so you can't depend on somebody else. If you have an attachment style as an adult that isn't healthy necessarily, or could be healthier, that's a much more beautiful way of saying it, that if you are in a healthy relationship where you're doing the work to repair that, it takes about 3 to 5 years within a working relationship to be able to mend some of those ruptures. So it's significant. Love in relationship, in any type of relationship, is quite significant. And here's the irony. I'm going off on a tangent just for a second, but I want to go there. Stay with me, homies. So here's what I'm thinking. This idea of sin has really captivated us for the whole of human history. I mean, literally our theology is based on how sinful and unworthy we are and how Jesus came to save us because we suck. So I want to say this, I don't want to sound heretical here, and it's okay if I do, but just bear with me.
Call the bishop.
Well, I think Pope Francis would love this podcast, so I'm not going to lie. But So here's what I'm thinking about sin. So often we see sin in a very dualistic way, right? Somewhat of an unevolved way. Let me just say this. So I have a lot of clients who have who we might term are sinful, right? Who've done sinful acts, watch pornography, compulsively overeat, experience addiction, cheat on their partners, or whatever it is. Here's the crazy thing. The survival mechanisms that move people to quote sin are embedded in our neural circuitry. We were given these ways of managing stress and trauma from God. I'm not saying that God made people sin. I'm just saying that initially, the way in which we could think about sin is less about people being bad or unworthy and shaming, and more about unevolved movements, strategies, maladaptive strategies that have yet to be outgrown by individuals who are reliant on these reinforced patterns of behavior. That most of us, when we do things we don't really want to do, that seem like they're hurting us, it's because at some point in our life, we acted out of a place where maybe that behavior helped us survive something. So I'm thinking about people who have, for example, individuals who have issues with compulsive overeating. Compulsive overeating and all addictions, the underlying pathology, if you even want to use that word pathology, or the underlying phenomenon beneath addiction, has everything to do with some type of attachment rupture. Some kind of pain, some kind of unmet need. All that stuff gets developed from early on. Let me tell you something. When if I was a 5-year-old child and I was being neglected at home, and all I knew how to do, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, whatever, it was eat a Snickers bar because that soothed me for a moment, I guarantee you Jesus would be hugging that child. He would not be like, listen, put the Snickers down, you're sinning, you're overeating. Absolutely not. I know it sounds like an absolutely absurd example, but what I'm saying is that sin, quote, sin, is when we refuse to evolve out of those maladaptive survival strategies. When we do them, often we're unconscious. We're not reflective. We're not using the part of our brain that's more evolved. And so the question for me is, can we have compassion for individuals who are still stuck, who are yearning to heal but don't know how? They've never learned. I don't know. This is hard stuff. It's really difficult for me because I sit there as a clinician and I have this, for me, what feels like sort of old school thinking about sin. And I want to capture these ideas in a way that feels more expansive, more elaborate, more comprehensive, deeper, wider, richer than just black and white, you sinned, you're going to hell. I don't know that people think that really quite, strongly on that level. But can the way in which we understand love and sin and grace be expanded and include explanations of healing the way that we know healing is happening now? That's my biggest question.
I think it's hard for a lot of us to think on that level because having an easy answer is so much easier.
I know. That's so good. That's so true.
Because we do it to ourselves, and therefore it's very easy to do it to other people. Like, I did this, I'm bad, I'm not a good person, and therefore, look at these other people who are doing X, Y, Z, and totally. I can say, oh, I'm better or worse than them, or what have you. And we can't have compassion for them if we're still stuck in this black and white,
Yes.
Heaven and hell, you're good, you're bad. And,
Correct.
Like I go back to St. Paul often, who says, I do the things I don't want to do. I have these two selves in me.
Yes.
And, to say I'm not living out of my fullest self right now,
Mm-hmm.
versus I'm a bad person and I'm a sinner and I suck. And yeah, that's it.
That's
There's
it.
no good in me.
Right. And that's limbic brain. That's not evolved brain, right? Because here's the thing. Evolved brain, I like to call it the Jesus brain, Christ brain, is one that's more unified. It doesn't do us versus them. It unifies. That's what love is. It's meant to connect rather than rupture and further isolate. It's a lie. And it's what we might call evil. Evil is that very thing. It's the mechanism that is an illusion that we are somehow separate from God and from other people and from ourselves. It's an illusion. And so it's really when we awaken from that illusion that we are able to act out of a higher ordered self, the one that is, again, more closely aligned with the divinity of God and Jesus. So it's easy to just say you, me, us, them. That's tribalism. That's the earliest forms of survivaling. The survivaling is now a word, people. Of survivaling.
Trademark, everyone.
Trademark. Copyright. Of survivaling in the world. That's what we used to, and quite frankly, we had to. Listen, I use this, maybe this will help. So have you ever seen, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but you can turn on like a Yuletide channel on YouTube where like it's Christmas, it's like a Christmas fire and there's like Christmas music. So here's the interesting thing about our brain, okay? If you get close enough to the screen, the brain might perceive it as a real fire. If you move away from the screen, you can see the wider perspective and recognize that it's not real and it's just on the screen. And so what happens to us is we are so close to an idea that immigrants are a threat, that these people are going to convert us to thinking this or that, whatever the case is, that we don't have the perspective to be able to recognize that people are really not a threat to us in the way that we think they are. So part of the work is to step the heck away from the stinking screen. Take a wider view, pause, reflect. But this us versus them thinking, that is a survival mechanism. And quite frankly, Jesus said, let's move away from that, right? Like, so laws about healing on the Sabbath. What if it interferes with love? If it interferes with love, don't do it. Move away from it. If it creates more rupture, if it creates more isolation, if it creates more division, if it creates more alienation, it's not love. I mean, it's very, very simple. And yet the argument too is that in order to change and shift and heal and grow out of those mechanisms, we have to work at it. And it has to be hopefully in conjunction with other people who can help us.
I want to touch back on something you said about grace, because I think when you get into the world of social work, of psychology, there could be a tendency to say, okay, learn these things, do these practices, and you're good to go. Like you've got your skills, you've worked on, healing your trauma, whatever. It can become where you believe that I just do these things and therefore I'm healing myself in a way,
Oh God. Yeah.
And I know, as a person of faith, as someone who comes from that Christian perspective, I know that it's much more than just that. That the power that I have, even the fact that I can learn, even the fact that I can experience calm and peace and those moments, those don't come from me. And so what are your thoughts on the idea of how to help people, but at the same time realizing that it is this higher power, and maybe it's more a matter of that's just an extra help for those who have that grace, or who have that idea that there is something greater than themselves, versus coming from a completely secular perspective of, I come, I learn, I tell my story, I hear some feedback, and therefore I'm good to go, and I'm doing the work, so to speak. And so where is the interplay between, the fact that we have a God that lives in us, who is also doing the work and giving us the strength for us to cooperate with that grace?
That's such a hard question. Because the one thought I had as you were talking was, are we surviving our traumas or our pains differently because we pray and therefore God gives us special favor and grace versus the people who don't believe? I have a hard time with that idea. Sometimes I wonder if God gives grace really to the people who aren't asking for it, who aren't praying for it, quite frankly. I mean, I actually think God favors those individuals versus, because they're going to probably need it more. I don't know. It's such a complicated question. What I do know is that when we, for example, when we do therapy, when we cultivate healthy relationships in partnership and family and friendships, there is some otherworldly transcendent energy that is exchanged between individuals that cannot be accounted for by science. It cannot, because that's by nature what it is, by definition. It's transcendent. And you and I call it God, spirit, the divine. Other people may give a different name to it. But to your point, that exists, and that is the magic. I don't know what other word to use. It's so difficult. That is the magic of healing. Grace is the capacity that humans have, both biologically and spiritually, to be able to change patterns, shift behaviors, experience metanoia, to find awakening, to raise their level of consciousness, to experience empathy and compassion. So you know what? Here's an interesting idea. Usually when we're empathic towards people, when we experience compassion, which I really truly think this is what Jesus did in the way in which he created. This is how miracles happen. This is my formula. This is my theory. Okay. How did Jesus do these miracles? First, he's got some crazy, amazing superpower, divine superpowers, right? Energetically and spiritually, for sure. But he also was an empath. So empathy, this is really incredible, but the experience of empathy requires a sense of resonance, right? So if you were sick, for example, I experience empathy by tapping into something within me that resonates about your experience. So let's say I've never lost a grandmother, but I have experienced loss. So empathy is when I actually tap into my experience of loss and extend that level of sensitivity to you. The word resonance comes from the word sonar. like it's like a radar. There's this energy. So if you think about a sonar, like in the middle of or underneath the water, and like a submarine between submarines, there's, what is that? These are sort of energetic sound waves that pass from one place to the other. We literally do the same thing when we empathize. There's this energetic exchange. I like to call that spirit, divine love. That's what the heck else could it be? It can't be anything else. I mean, we could say, we have mirror neurons in our brains, right? Like your brain is sort of talking about there's something else. I cannot be convinced. I know it sounds really ridiculous, but to your point, there is something else. Absolutely. So, but that something else acts to its fullest capacity when we are collaborating in the process. The way in which Jesus healed is through empathic, compassionate movements of heart to heal individuals. Why? Because A, they wanted to be healed, and B, they recognized that it could be done, and in collaboration with him. Again, he didn't just go up to someone and be like, you are healed. Because if someone's like, I don't want to be healed. The Pharisees didn't want to be healed, so he wasn't going to be working on them. But there were plenty of Pharisees. There was plenty of other individuals who were like, yes, I want this. I want to say goodbye to sort of my unevolved self and move through a transition of awakening and healing into really understanding the fullest form of what love is. I long-winded answer. I know.
But I think it harkens back to, for us, the creed of things visible and invisible. That there is this other energies and other spirits that are there. And I think you've probably met enough people to have a sense of when people are being oppressed, when there's possibly other spirits going on because of the things that they've been through. And it's amazing that God is not bound by anything, and therefore he can be working and healing and touching hearts, whether that's somebody who prays or doesn't pray, or believes or doesn't believe. And I think we can't discount those things, because the world will say, well, we like angels and demons in our movies, but those things aren't really real. I think there's a valid fascination that we have with things that are not seen. And when we can tap into grace and to know that we're surrounded by the cloud of witnesses, I mean, that's where you start to say, wow, okay, that thought or that feeling or that image didn't come from me, that God is in there. And of course you get into sort of discernment of spirits and, is this from me or is this from God or not? But when you're in the thick of it, it's really hard to get to that place. Do you have, I don't know what you would call it, like a success story, or is there someone in that you want to highlight in this work that you're doing that was able to tap into some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say most of my work is that. It's repairing these painful relational wounds. It's interesting because, and you would know this too, Sister Liz, because, you and I have gone through the same exact training in our graduate work. But we're really sort of taught, I don't know how it was for you, but there is this, we do have to maintain healthy boundaries with our clients so that there isn't a level of transference and projection and countertransference. We just have to really be careful for things like that. But quite frankly, I have many times teared up in sessions with clients because I can feel that I'm meant to be in that place. I can feel the mentingness of being in that place. I was the one selected to walk through this process by God, by some divine order, not I don't think it's coincidence, but there is some divine movement. And the people that I sit with teach me a lot, but in terms of success, the success comes, I'm not thinking of anything specific. Also, I don't want to be too confidentiality averse, but I've seen people change in remarkable ways, and I will tell you, it is nothing but love that creates that change. And for me, love is God. So any extension of myself or any climate or atmosphere or energetic movement within the room where I work that leads to healing is the fingerprint of God in that space. Again, other people might call it spirit, other people might call it sort of like a divine energy, whatever the term is. For me, I call it God or divine, whatever. But I've seen people who have admitted to their experiences of rape, who experience debilitating, paralyzing shame, and have found new confidence and an ability to be assertive in life. And forgiveness is tough. Mm-hmm. I think one of the themes that I see a lot in my work is around shame. And I've sat with that and had multiple conversations with God about this idea, because we say we're unworthy. We say that we're unworthy to begin with, right? Like, that's our theology. My theology has shifted. It's really difficult to tell people, oh, whoops, sorry, you're unworthy. Good thing for Jesus. Like, that's not a good starting point in therapy. The better starting point is you were made in love, and therefore there is nothing to be ashamed of. For me, that aligns my spirit with the spirit of God a lot more. But I've seen, I'm not thinking of anything specific, but this is part of that's part of the work, and it doesn't happen overnight. You know this, you do this work.
Yeah. It's a journey. And I think, for those who have the privilege of doing this work, I think these are grace-filled moments, and God is there. Mm-hmm. God is in that call.
For sure.
What are your hopes with this manuscript?
Yeah.
I'm going to call it a book because I want it to be a book.
Oh, I like you. Speak that into existence. I like it. My hope is that we can understand some of these traditional concepts, and we can understand them in a different way, a more contemporary, modern context through a language that we're now formulating because of what we're learning about through research, not just neurobiological research, but development research. I don't know. The hope is that love is bigger. It's a more expanded definition and therefore expression. So is God, so is healing, so is sin, so is grace. I mean, think about it. Think about this. This is nuts. God gave us the capacity to literally change the neural circuitry of our brain in service of healing. What? That is, I mean, honestly, that's crazy. We also were gifted, again, with the capacity to utilize mechanisms to help us survive and mechanisms to outgrow some of those survival strategies to thrive. What the heck?
We have a good God. We do.
I'm teary-eyed thinking about how loved we are. I mean, I'm about to cry. I'm astounded that there is something in this world that loves us so much that says, dang it, I had to give you free will and therefore I had to allow suffering. And yet, I'm going to do everything in my power to give you the mechanisms, the tools to be able to heal your wounds, teach you how to awaken, expand your capacity to love self and others and me, and just generally speaking, help other people to do the same. What? If that's not grace, I honestly, I don't know what is. I really don't know what is. It's astounding. It's awe-inspiring. And if we have that capacity, why wouldn't we take advantage of it? Why wouldn't we? And again, going back to our original story, that's the story of the Good Samaritan. He acted out of a place of divine love, an expanded, non-dualistic, non-binary perception of threat place. No fear. No, what am I going to get for this? No, oh, we're different. No, oh, I'm inconvenienced. Nope, I'm not sure if I have enough money. He didn't, those were not deterrents. He didn't act out of that place. He acted out of a reflective, awakened, connected, compassionate, empathic, attuned, connected. I use that word because it's my favorite. Relational, divine, reparative, healed, miraculous place. That's what Jesus's message is. Get outside of yourself and move into a new realm of like connection.
I have one last question as we wrap up.
Let's hear it.
When are you going on Oprah's show Super Soul Sunday? Because that is some Super Soul Sunday stuff right there.
Where is she? Where's my girl Oprah? Oh, that's so sweet.
I know it's not
Oprah when I have you. Let's be honest. I mean, Super Soul, whatever today is.
I really appreciate your reflections and the work that you're doing. I think I feel a sense of healing and unity just in our conversation, because this is deep stuff. And if we can play even the smallest part in creating this reality for other people and for ourselves, I mean, that's such a gift. And so I thank you for sitting down with me today.
Yeah.
And
thanks for having me.
I hope we can see more of you, read more from you. And we'll see you on Oprah, hopefully sooner than later.
And we'll say it all started here.
All right. Thanks, Wid.
All right. Love you.
Love you.